This episode of Tools for the Future covers the 5 different kinds of value. Most people in business only look at 2 kinds of value: price and features, or price and performance. These represent functional value and financial value. And what most business people miss is that there are 3 entirely different kinds of value in addition to these: emotional, identity, and meaningful. And because they miss them, and not only do they miss them, but these last 3 kinds of value have much more impact, are much more powerful, and ultimately lead to more value altogether. Over the past 10 years, at least in the SF Bay Area, business has really adopted a shift in its understanding of the value of design. And it's spreading to other parts of the world and other industries as well. Of course, this is a great thing for design, no matter the discipline, but it has also highlighted an important divide that we need to consciously bridge, and it's a cultural divide. When I say design here, I really mean architecture, sometimes even engineering, but those involved with development of solutions or offerings. These worlds have always had odd relationships, sometimes extremely productive, other times a little contentious. They're rife with assumptions, misconceptions, and misunderstandings, characterizations I will be sure to repeat and make fun of throughout this episode. But creativity isn't actually the sole domain of design. Some of the most creative people I've met are other kinds of professionals. What's really at opposition here are 2 different mindsets, one of optimization and one of imagination. The first is concentrated on certainty. The second works best in ambiguity. And these lead to other dialectics as well. Minimal viable product, for instance, is what a lot of people, especially in the Silicon Valley world, look for and how they define their first steps in development. Designers and others on the creation side often look to experience in a way to prototype it. They aren't looking at minimal. But one of the things to keep in mind, regardless of where you come from, is that value itself is designable. But you need to reinterpret what value means. Most business people, even MBAs, are taught to ignore key aspects of value in favor of the easy stuff, which is price and performance, or financial and functional value. This makes innovation and product development an uphill battle. Everything we create evokes an experience. So we need to understand experience well, and we need to understand the context of experience in order to understand the opportunities around value within it. There are other episodes in my channel that describe experience, the dimensions of experience, and experience strategy. But recognize that all business is the process of evoking experiences. In other words, we're all in the experience business, whether we choose to believe it or acknowledge it or not. The business world is no stranger to functional and financial value, of course. That's what most business people and most business students are taught practically on day one. The focus of most business tools and processes are on building strategy around price and performance, or price and features. In addition, almost every board meeting emphasizes a review of the financials. And this is all great, but it's often done to the detriment of other kinds of value. Now, business people know that there's more to their jobs and responsibilities than just financial and functional value, and surely they see evidence of it in premium brands. But they've never been taught how to make use of it, how to measure it, and certainly not how to design strategy around it. Therefore, they're pretty bad about doing so. Whether they call these other forms of value lifetime customer value or brand value, business people, and especially economics, are trying to find ways to quantify the missing pieces of this value in the market. But those missing pieces here make it really difficult to measure and manage. There are no agreed upon measures of brand value, for instance. There's about 5 or 6 standard, quote unquote, ways of doing it, but no agreement on how to integrate it with other financial reporting. And the other problem with trying to quantify these other pieces of value is that these other 3 forms of value aren't quantitative, they're qualitative. And any attempts to simply quantify them will neutralize the most important parts of their value. So think about these 5 different kinds of value that I've identified. Traditional business, of course, is effective at the first two, but often at the expense of the other three. Now, these kinds of value are bidirectional, and they're dynamic, meaning they're always changing. If we aren't tracking them continually or measuring them at all, we're missing what's happening completely. In addition, all value is transferred in some sort of relationship. If there's no relationship, there's no transference of value in any direction. And without some form of experience, there can be no relationship and therefore no method to trade value. This is really the equation you should be focused on in the future for your business. And this is just as true in civic innovation, for instance, with NGOs, or looking at serving society in new ways outside of a commercial context, as it is for commercial entities. So whenever we're in business, we're in the relationship business. And we're all in the relationship business. Every single organization, every single person in every single organization. Whether they recognize it or not, this is the case. And this makes relationships strategic. There's nothing more strategic than the relationships we build, since that's the only way we can exchange value. This also means that experience is strategic, which makes design in all its forms critical. The better the experience, the better the relationship, and the better the value that emerges. So we're all in the experience business, again, whether we recognize it or not. Now, many companies and business people think that they're not in the experience business. They've been taught that experience is something special and unique, only offered by a few special companies. But all of these, whether commodity or product or service, are experiences. When we forget that we're in the experience business, we just make terrible experiences as a result. One of the biggest challenges to business is that the best value is actually hidden, and traditional business tools don't illuminate it. This is a blind spot for traditional businesses, business people, and business tools. Design thinking and design process is one of the best methods that can help illuminate, build, and manage these hidden forms of value. Instead of being intuitive or accidental about qualitative value and its creation, we can be deliberate. As we move into qualitative value from quantitative value, it gets more personal, more stable, more valuable, but also more difficult to work with. Functional value is focused on features and performance. Essentially, the first question we ask ourselves when we're deciding between options is, does this do what I need? This is often seen as rational and is almost always conscious and even spoken to others. These are easy questions to research and understand, but they're shallow ones. As we move deeper, our question changes. Now it's not just about whether this is functional for me, but what price am I willing to pay for these functions? Features and price are actually low-value, short-lasting connections with people and highly competitive. And most businesses focus almost entirely on price and performance. This means that they're most focused on the least valuable and most competitive value. Deeper still, our questions become more intimate and abstract. At the emotional level, we ask ourselves, does this make me feel good or bad or younger or more successful or whatever it is that we feel we need? At this level, we've crossed from the quantitative to the qualitative. And very often, this value is unconscious, making it difficult to research and understand. We also erroneously assume that this is irrational value and irrational decision-making. And that's a mistake. If I purchase something that makes me feel better, whether or not I recognize it, that's an entirely rational decision. It's just one out of my focus or out of my consciousness. But as powerful and influential as emotions are, they last only a short duration, usually between 30 and 120 seconds. A mood might last all day, but even moods usually get reset at night. Moving deeper, things get even more personal until the questions focus on our identities, whether or not we realize it. Are you a Coke person or a Pepsi person? Mac or Windows? Native or urbanite? Techno, classical? Obviously, there's more answers to these than just two in most cases. But we implicitly gravitate towards things that we identify with, that feel like us, and will discount products and services and other experiences that don't feel right for us. It's funny to think about Coke versus Pepsi, or being a Mac person or a Windows person, or an iOS versus Android. That's just a simple way to think about this. But the reality of the impact of our connections with products, companies, brands, etc., is very real. And we could probably have a conversation about whether this is a good thing or not, whether building relationships with inanimate objects or institutions is helpful. But the reality is that we do this all the time. Now we've reached the deepest point of connection between people, or between people and products and brands and organizations or movements. Meaning is a complex phenomenon, but the model is clear. We don't actually want a simple life, because lack of choices that make our lives personal isn't fulfilling. We want options, and with that comes complexity. Design's response is to help business, government, society, and other kinds of organizations clarify these options so they are easier to understand and choose, and therefore allow us to build meaningful lives that are clear but not simple. The question we ask ourselves at this level isn't so much about us, but the world around us and how we understand it. So at this level, we evaluate products, services, events, other kinds of experiences within the context of, do they fit in our world? Is this something I can relate to at all? And in doing so, does it align with my values? A key question for many business people is, how much is this qualitative value worth? Because they're used to working with the quantitative value. So let me give you an example. In 2012, Facebook purchased Instagram for the, at the time, jaw-dropping and extravagant price of $1.1 billion. This was a 2-year-old firm with 13 people in it. We know some of the details. The week before the acquisition, the company's balance sheet valued it at only $86 million. And that includes the $50 million that was invested just the week before. So according to standard accounting tools, which are mandated and regulated by the government, this was only an $86 million company. So where was the rest of the $1 billion+ hiding? It was hiding in these other forms of value, in the qualitative value. And this isn't unique to internet or even technology firms. Every healthy company is worth more than the books say it is, precisely because their relationships are valuable. They're just not tracked by the financial accounting. They're often as difficult to establish as well as to maintain. This is the value of relationships. It's also the value that design can add to businesses. It's what Facebook actually bought. When a business person claims that design, experience, relationship, emotions, meaning, etc. aren't important, this is what you should point to. It turns out that it's the most important thing in business, even in a financial sense. Just look at the numbers here. The books say it was an $86 million company, and all of the business tools and business processes were focused only on that quantitative value. But how does the qualitative value stack up against the quantitative value? The answer is pretty clear. It's hundreds of times more than the quantitative value. So it's really the qualitative value that every entrepreneur and every investor is trying to create. They just don't know it, and they don't have the tools to build and maintain and manage it. Traditional business tools absolutely ignore this value, and that's where designers can come in. But too often we don't know how to articulate this value and these relationships to our peers. Here's another example. This is Apple's stock price over about 30 or 40 years. The iPod went on sale in 2001, but sales of iPods, as well as the market cap for the company, didn't really take off until about 2005. The iTunes Store opened in April of 2003, and this is what caused Apple's fortunes to start turning. Now, this graph is all about the stock price, and that has as much to do with how analysts and investors see the company as it does the actual financial performance of the company. Right around 2003, the market, meaning the analysts and investors, decided that Apple wasn't just a niche computer company anymore. It was the predominant digital music company, and that's what made the stock start taking off. The iPod absolutely changed everything for Apple, and it was almost an accident. At least at the very beginning, it was a curiosity and not a strategy. So the iPod became big business for Apple, but the company around this time noticed something important and interesting about people's behavior. And that was that people only really want to carry about 3 things in their pockets: their keys, their wallet, plus one more thing. For some customers, that might be a camera, or a mobile phone, or a gaming device, or a personal digital assistant. For Apple, that third thing was an iPod. But more and more, that third thing was turning into a mobile phone. Apple realized early that it had to do something or it would begin to lose this newfound market. It needed to get into the phone. I guess it could have tried to get into the keys and the wallet, but neither of those were digital at the time. And recognized this wasn't based on typical market research. It was based on an observation about the experience people had in the world at the time. Now, Apple knew that mobile phones were taking off, and they knew that they were going to replace that third thing in people's pockets, so they knew they had to get into the phone. And so what did they do? Do you remember the first Apple phone? Most likely not. On September 7, 2005, Apple and Motorola launched the Motorola Rocker. You don't remember it because it flopped, and everyone at Apple prefers to ignore this product. So it's interesting to consider Apple's strategy here. Apple knew how difficult phones were and that they had no expertise in mobile phones. They didn't really want to become a phone company at all. Instead, they partnered with the best manufacturer in the United States at the time that they could find, and that was Motorola, the makers of the Razr phone. This was an incredibly smart strategic decision. They knew they weren't a phone company and weren't going to become a phone company easily, and weren't willing to spend the $1 billion needed to turn themselves into a phone company. But when the Rocker flopped, Apple had to change its strategy. It decided it had to become a phone company after all, even though it didn't particularly want to in the beginning. It wasn't until June 29th of 2007 that Apple shipped its first iPhone. And this, of course, changed everything for Apple, for customers, and for the entire industry. In order to develop and ship what it thought was a possible, preferable product, Apple had to become a different company, and it needed a strategy to do that. But what was driving that strategy was all based on an observation about customer experience, behavior, and preference. And that's the value of design. So the difference between book value, which is an accounting term for what the company's worth at any given time, and goodwill, which is that magical moment when a company finds out that it's worth a lot more than the books say it is. This is exactly what investors and owners, employees, and everyone else want. The challenge is to be able to build this extraordinary value while still using the same tools and processes we use to manage the rest of the quantitative value. And that's very difficult. This is why innovation can be so elusive. Really, this is the divide at its heart that needs bridging, not just in business, but in culture. Quantitative value and qualitative value are both very different. They're created, managed, and measured differently. But traditional business tools aren't great at qualitative value, only quantitative value. And this is where design comes in and why it's become so important recently. Quantitative value tells you the what. Qualitative value tells you the why. And quantitative value never gives you the answer. It merely informs it. Quantitative value and the numbers aren't the story. They're just an important part of the story. But if you're not looking at all parts of the story, the numbers and the things that aren't numbers, you just don't have the whole story. So you can imagine how difficult it is to create a strategy, let alone successful products and services, around a lacking story. What we need to focus on is both the quantitative and qualitative value, or the total value. This is because value is more than just the financial, and we need to bring this conversation not only into our work, but into the meeting rooms and even the boardrooms. Designers and design researchers know an important part of the story of customers and the organization and society as a whole that isn't known or represented when most strategic decisions are being made, certainly using a traditional strategic process. Those companies and people who focus on total value create more of it, and they do so more often. And we as designers have a responsibility for making sure that total value is the thing being considered and focused upon. Business people are extremely confident about things that are true, and unfortunately many that aren't. And this represents a big part of the rift between design and business values, not just different approaches. So we as designers, or sometimes engineers, or other people that don't use traditional business tools, need to understand these myths of business and where they impact our work and our effectiveness. But as designers and architects, we have some things to consider too. We have our own myths of design and how important it is, and often those don't translate outside of our culture either. So work is needed on both sides. But don't miss the important and obvious thesis here. Often people are willing to pay for experience more than they realize. They look at other indicators than just price and performance, and we call these triggers. But experience is the thing that usually makes the difference in driving decisions, comparing value, and afterward valuing and remembering the experience. The qualitative side of this is incredibly valuable, but unfortunately, it's almost always invisible, and this is what makes it difficult. Our business peers don't see a lot of this value and discount it as a result because these things are invisible or ambiguous or not defined as rational, so they're usually just ignored. Another way to say this is that those companies and people who focus on total value, on the qualitative and the quantitative, are in a better position to create more of it more often. And another way to say this in a business context is to use the term premium value. Most business people know what premium value is. And unless they're in a commodity business, they're striving to create some form of premium value because they know that it will make for a more successful company. But too often they're using traditional business tools and processes to do so, and these make no place for qualitative or total value. Other episodes of mine will discuss what to do with these 5 kinds of value. But for now, this represents the most critical understanding. There's much more, in fact, in my book Blind Spot, which is available from Rosenfeld Media, as well as linked off experiencedesignbooks.com. Thank you.